Hello, Chris from Fontofinspiration. Very nice to hear from you, man. Thank you for the video response question about time travel and alternate timelines and parallel dimension travel through time. You are correct. There, in the scenario that I pointed out of the original character A traveling into alternate dimension B and interacting with all of the alternate dimension B people, there is no way to go. Even if he appears to be traveling backwards in time to that point in his time, he's just crossing over into the current time in a alternate dimension where everything is happening at a different rate of time. So if he went back to stop the king in dimension B from being killed, he's merely stopped that king from being killed in that dimension. He's now stuck in that timeline unless he goes back to his original or an alternate timeline where that king is still threatened or dead. So yeah, he could change the course of events or influence the course of events in dimension B, but never actually change the course of events in his original dimension A. So you're correct. There's no way to actually change time in your own home dimension using that method. The other ideas, so Transdimensional Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles handled time travel quite innovatively, and there's some real gems of thinking in that overall franchise of RPG there. In that, time was a sort of a loop, and there were points where time crossed over where you could enter at a specific moment in an era, but you couldn't arrive at a specific time. You had to arrive at these set moments in every century or decade or whatever, and it was a matter of skill to roll on the skill check as to navigating time outside of those sort of set points. And of course you can have magical devices which allow time travel in your own time, but set various magical constraints. Or my favorite one is have such as if you've got a monster like an ethereal filcher or something like that in your game, then it presupposes that there is an ethereal plane. Otherwise, if those monsters don't show up, then you could say that there's no ethereal plane. It doesn't even need to exist. It's outside of everybody's awareness in that game setting. You don't need to worry about it. If characters can travel through time, then you could say that there is a temporal dimension, and in that temporal dimension there are creatures. There is a civilization which has its own motives and means of operating within the various prime material planes that intersect through its overarching temporal dimension. And they could very well have a motive to stop paradoxes from happening. So the moment the character makes a decision, or the player makes a decision that causes his character to potentially create a paradox, he is intersected by either creatures of very mysterious origin pop up out of nowhere. The dromites of, was it Eberron? Or I think it's Eberron that the dromites show up. So some sort of time-traveling creature or a native of time traveling, something really scary perhaps, like mind flayers, show up and stop them in their tracks, to the point of even they will exit them, they will banish them from that point in time and slingshot them back to their starting origin, so they just boom, start back where they were. But everything that they had changed up into that point in the past has taken effect. So you could say that they allow a certain amount of change, but nothing really drastic that will influence your story. So that's perfectly workable, but you have to be quick, and you have to be on your ball about thinking about the repercussions of things, and be quite harsh about that sort of stuff. The other good one is where I've got a particularly good story about a campaign where this sort of thing happened, where there's a crossing over. If the characters from dimension A can move into other dimensions or can move through their own timeline, then future versions of themselves, B, C, D, from 2 days hence, 6 months hence, 20 years hence, can also travel through time. So if the original A decides to go back and cause the death of a monarch or something like that, then individual replica of themselves, B, will show up and prevent that from happening. So they see themselves standing there, who goes, don't do this, that's a really bad idea, and then vanishes. So it's them telling themselves not to do it. So by that, you give yourself, the DM, agency to say, no, your character actually says that's a bad idea to themselves, because they point out, this is going to happen if you do this. This is the future that I live in. Please stop. Or it could be that, even better, it's actually an individual from an alternate plane of existence who has traveled. So it turns out that your character is actually from dimension B, and dimension A has come over from their current time, which is the future for you, popped over and said, don't do it, and then they popped back, and it's, okay, stop. Yeah, so it starts to get a little bit complicated, but if you draw simple timelines like a line and A and B and things like that, you can work it out. Another fantastic one is if you use it in a trap, and the players at the table actually have to figure out such a arrangement of different dimensional states. So the danger of the trap is that they can be trapped in an alternate dimension and not be able to get back home. So they may travel from A to B to C to D and not realize where they've gone wrong, where they've made the wrong turn, and actually have to navigate their way back to their home dimension, which can be hilarious, particularly when they encounter alternate versions of themselves, particularly in a long-running campaign where you can introduce them to alternate versions of themselves where key events in the campaign's past went very differently. So characters that died in one dimension are actually still there in another, and therefore characters that came in to replace them never show up. So you can have entirely different sort of scenarios, and it can be very confusing if the party gets split up, meets up with alternate versions of their other characters in their party, and it takes a little bit of communication between the two to figure out that that's actually an alien being, that's not the person I know. They don't have an evil intention, or perhaps not, but it makes for an amazing role-playing experience, and it's one of the situations where I got to just sort of sit back and let the players talk in character to each other in alternate characters. They were talking to themselves in characters. It was fantastic. It was a good 8 minutes of just solid immersive roleplay, which stretched into 15 minutes of lots of panic and confusion. And if it wasn't for me intervening and saying that smashing a mirror here or doing this actually slingshotted the original character back into their own timeline, 90% of them would have been stranded in alternate dimensions, and it would have been the end of the campaign. So it was dangerous for me too. But they got that heebie-jeebies about how precarious such a situation would be, that it was possible to be stranded in space and time. So yeah, I hope that gives a little bit more insight. The alternate dimension version that I said was basically it's guaranteed method to basically take the teeth out of time travel, so that it can't turn around and bite you, all the players, in their ass. However, you can introduce more risky time travel, but with a safety net of alternate beings that exist in a temporal dimension, or alternate versions of themselves, future or past or parallel dimension versions of themselves that can intersect and stop potential campaign destroying railroading problems from occurring. And you can introduce the idea of temporal travel and things, and dimensional travel, cross-dimensional travel, into traps and means of getting between worlds and things like that. So not only do you have Sigil, the City of Doors, for instance, or some sort of magical portal that can travel to various planes of existence, but alternate versions of those, alternate dimensions, parallel worlds, parallel prime material planes suddenly become available. And it could be that the outer planes and the divine planes are very far away, and then even further away is the far realm, and it's really just a parallel dimension which is so far removed that all of the events, including the laws of physics that were established at the start of time, are completely different. So it's if you imagine a branching tree, it's the far branch. That's what the far realm is. And slightly further in on that is elemental planes, and then further in from that is divine planes, and then further in from that is astral and ethereal, and then right close by is Feywild, and then closer into that you get temporal dimensions, and closer into that you get parallel dimensions. So yeah, and you can navigate it, but a lot of the work has been done for you in D&D, in that there are portals and spells and things which allow you to travel to set positions, set places. Yeah, so they're fixed dimension. They're fixed dimensional locations, but you imagine that there's an infinite number of abysses, there's an infinite number of Olympuses, there's an infinite number of prime material planes, and they're all different temporal versions of themselves as well. So it gets mind-boggling, but yeah. Hope you enjoyed your berries. I envy you. Wandering around and gathering berries in Finland sounds lovely. Thanks for your video response again, Chris, and I hope that helped.